Put powdered sugar in there. If you don't want to harm the bees, you let them sit for, yeah, or the other way, roughly a half a cup. Actually, we use quarter cup now. So half a cup, fill it up into there. That's
about 300 bees or a half a cup. Half a cup's about 300 bees.
Yeah. And so if you're using powdered sugar in here, you put a tablespoon or your hive tool, because all of us have a hive tool. You just take a heaping scoop of powdered sugar, put it on there, scrape it down into there, tap it down a little bit all over the bees, let it sit for about 2 minutes. Then with your trusty dish pan or a little Tupperware bowl or white paper, anything, I like to use a bowl. I'll shake all the powdered sugar off the bees and tap it a couple times. Bowl with a little bit of water, because your mites all of a sudden appear with the powdered sugar washing off of them, and you can see them in there with no problem. I've got to wear readers all the time, so they used to look like the size of a quarter inch, but now they're getting so small they look like a very small dot. We put 1/8 inch hardware cloth on here. Bo uses mesh.
This was something that Joey, we came up with some windscreen free. We came up with this.
I don't know why I got plastic 1/8 inch screen.
Hey, as long as it works.
And then,
But if you don't want to harm the bees, that's a method you can do. You'll be able to actually release those bees after you powdered sugared them and getting the mite numbers. If you find 3 to 4 mites in there, you need to start looking for a treatment. Powdered sugar does not work as good as an alcohol wash. We used to call it an ether roll. We used to use starter fluid, spray into the jar. The jar had a lid on it. We would spray, get the bees in there, put them down, same number roughly 200 to 300 bees in there. We would spray ether in there. Now you got a smoker lit right beside you. You just sprayed ether into this jar and you're shaking it and you roll. And the ether would cause the bees to throw up their nectar that was in their crop. It would allow the mites that had passed out because of the ether in there to stick to the edge of the jar. That worked good until about 1996. They changed all your ether that you were buying over the counter to having top cylinder oil on it. It doesn't make the mites stick anymore. We will look and you get 1 or 2 mites to stick to the jar, they stay on the bees. So we went to using alcohol. Just cheap rubbing alcohol, isopropyl, whatever. You use a solid lid. You can use a screen. I don't know if this plastic window screen will stand up to cheap alcohol, but I'm sure it must. But we'll fill it up, put some alcohol in there, fill it about halfway full with the alcohol and the bees, and agitate it for about a minute. Just shake it around and then get the bees, the mites in there and loosen them up. Some people will sit here and try to count them through here. I take this solid jar lid off, put the screen one on, or I pour the alcohol straight through here because I got the bees in there and I just slosh it without it splashing out that much. Then I pour, same Cool Whip bowl, works great. Same thing for your powdered sugar wash you can do. But then I'll pour the mites out and I'll dump the alcohol into here. The mites will sink to the bottom of the bowl. I'll pour the alcohol back into here, wash them 2 or 3 times till I don't get any more mites. That's a more accurate mite count. Make sure you're still getting the bees from on the brood, emerging brood. If you get bees from up in the top of the honey super, you're not going to get an accurate mite count because your bees that are up in the honey supers normally don't have the mites on them. It's the ones that are around the brood nest. So that's very important. Don't go to your honey house wall and get them off there. Like I said, we don't use the ether test anymore, or ether roll. The other thing was, if you're sitting here and you open up ether and you got a smoker right there, you all of a sudden get this deep blue flame that goes boom. And yeah. Any questions on mite test?
What you're trying to do on your mites is you want to try to get that 300 bees in there, because anything,
Right.
when you do that roll, anything at 5 mites or more, that hive is doomed. It's got 3 months and that's it.
You've
It's
got
going
to start
down.
treating it with some product that's legal out there. You had a question?
How accurate is the natural know, the easy count.
The easy count,
Compared to this.
if the bees are emerging out of the cell, it's fairly accurate, because as long as you have brood hatching, and you will see where the brood's hatched. If you have actual dwell boards, they're called, they're segregated out and have little grids on them. You can see right where the brood lines are. You can see where the brood is hatched out and where the dead mites are falling through. You got to realize that the mite that falls through that bottom board most likely is already dead. It was the actual founderess mite that went into that cell, has reproduced second or third time. Now she passed away. They threw her out and down into the, screen bottom board. So if you got in the springtime, you normally won't get near as many mites through natural fall as you will this time of the year. You're getting older mites.
So it's more accurate later in the summer?
Yeah, it's more accurate, but any way of measuring your mites, just make sure if you start seeing, let's say you do this once every month by sticking the sticky board in, and you see you went from 2 or 3 mites a day to all of a sudden 10 or 12 mites, and it can happen very fast. What happens is your bees go out and rob somebody's hive that's died from varroa mites. Now they brought all those fleas back, as I call it. It's like your cat going over and visiting your neighbor's cat. They got more fleas probably. They bring them back, and same thing with honeybees. They bring the nectar or honey back, but they also bring the varroa mites. So, yes,
Good question, Dave. If you treat, let's say, with apiarys, is that honey then that you've left on the hive for bees?
Great question.
Is that rendered completely?
Yeah, because apiarys is one of the products that actually breaks down fairly fast. It goes into the wax. It doesn't really go into the honey as easy because of the chemical breakdown of it. It just does that, and it goes towards the lipids, so fats. So that's one good thing, but it's still a chemical we don't want to be consuming. So when you're treating with apiarys or the Apigard, there's a new one coming out with that they're trying to get into the U.S. It's a pyrethrin. All of them are in that same category of chemicals. The problem is our mites got resistant to fluvalvinate. Now they're trying to bring in another chemical in Canada that they're using. It seems to work, and right now we can get a treatment with fluvalvinate, but the mites get resistance almost 2 life cycles later. So we don't want to keep using, like the apiarys for some reason, because it's got 3 modes of action, it doesn't seem to have the ability of the mite getting resistance to it. But you do not want to treat while you're during a honey flow. Actually, by label law, you cannot treat during a honey flow unless you leave that honey strictly for the bees. It's not for human consumption then. So you've got 14 days after treating. You've got to follow the law. It's the same on any product.
Follow the label, just read the label. Whatever the recommendation is, follow that recommendation on your treatment.
So if people are waiting for a full harvest to do another second extraction,
Yeah.
they should wait until after that before they treat with that apiarys.
Or use a chemical that's approved to use and then take the honey. There are chemicals out there, they may not be as good. We're actually testing powdered sugar again to see. It's amazing. We're only doing it on 2 hives. We're doing it every 72 hours. And we did the one hive that had 4 mites fell through the powdered sugar. The other one had 96, I think it was, when all we did is drop powdered sugar through. And so it's amazing that we even picked up, a small number of mites. But what happens with powdered sugar is very benign. It doesn't hurt the bees. The mites have little suction cups on their fingers, actually hairs, that allow them to stick, and they can crawl up glass and do all sorts of stuff. That's how they get on bees and hang on real good. But with powdered sugar, they can't. They fall off. If you got a screen bottom board, they fall off and go down, and the ants take care of them. But it takes normally every 72 hours, because that mite is actually phoretic for 96 hours roughly, meaning it's on the back of the bee running around trying to get her blood piece. then she goes back and reproduces. So if you can break that at 72 hours, it might work. That's a lot of treating. Yes,
Do you put the powdered sugar on the top, or do you open, do you do it on?
you got to do it on the top so it drifts down. It's best to do it late in the afternoon. And we'll tell you what it's like. This is only 2 hives. This isn't a full study. We had a beekeeper for 7 or 8 years that was queen producer down in Hillsborough County area, actually Polk County, Hillsborough line. He kept his bees for 7 years without treating them and used powdered sugar. And he actually learned it from me about 15, 20 years ago almost. And he never treated with anything else. He's now sold his bees, but he said the problem was you had to do it 72 hours or less. You have to do it for that 22 days. Reason being is your brood is capped for roughly 11 days. You don't worry about the uncapped brood, except your mite wants to go under that uncapped brood, so that larva in there. So if you can break it up for roughly 21 or 22 days, you hope you can get that.
Varroa is one of the biggest challenges for beekeepers. It's a little mite that breeds and makes the brood change.
Is that because it's so warm here that they're not?
The hive stays warm no matter what.
No matter where
Yeah.
it is?
You can be in 80 below zero and it's going to stay
warm there. Huh.
nice and warm. So the varroa mite actually swapped host. It came from an Asian bee. The Asian bee, it just reproduced in the drone brood. It never affected. It may be also that Asian bee, the American foul brood called antibiotics. The European foul brood was simple. You broke the brood cycle and you treat it with the same antibiotics. You got rid of it. We used the same antibiotics since I was a kid. Actually, we had sulfathiazole when I was a young kid, 5 years older or less. Then we went to terramycin or oxytetracycline. We finally, about 6 years ago, got a new chemical or new antibiotic, lincomycin, and about 10 or 15 years before that, we got a hard antibiotic approved that most backyard beekeepers aren't going to use, but tylosin, it knocks American foul brood out pretty good.
That's a varroa mite, American foul brood?
No, varroa mites, varroatosis as they call it. It's a actual mite that gets on the bee. American foul brood is a spore-forming bacteria. It's sort of like botulism, some of the other ones that last as a spore forever. European foul brood does not form a spore, so it's easier to get rid of. They got to pay twice as much, right? You got to pay twice as much now. But yes.
Well, kind of going back and forth, and I keep getting different opinions. No matter who I ask, they always have a different opinion of this.
Well, that's a beekeeper. You ask 10 beekeepers for an answer, you're going to get 20 answers.
And they're all contradictory.
Right.
OVA.
Uh-huh.
What's your opinion on it?
OVA.
Oxalic acid
yeah.
vaporization.
We're going to have next month, we're going to have a talk on it. That's what actually we're starting to prep this. So next month, we're going to have Cameron Jack, who's been doing a big research project at UF. He came and did a talk last year on what USDA recommendations were and showed us our results last year in October, and it wasn't real good. It wasn't a positive. He took the European standard of what their treatment was, and he's applied it this year. So next month, he's going to do a talk on his latest results.
Why I didn't answer that one is because Cameron's done a good job on it.
He'll give us a talk at Bee College. I think he'll be doing a talk on it at Bee College also, which is happening October 12th and 13th at UF. We have the new Bee Lab open over in Gainesville. It's fabulous beyond.
Yeah, who was there at the opening? Besides Bo was there, you were there.
Yeah,
Or Skip was there. We had the opening last Friday and Saturday. We had 1,500 people showed up. It was unreal. The other thing, I did 22 different research projects, I think it is, on oxalic. And the last probably 3, we look at everything from the evaporators all the way through. And the Canadians would say, oh yeah, we get great treatment with it. They come down here And we were that, what state is it, says Show Me State? Illinois?
Missouri?
Missouri, yeah. That's how we were, because the guy would come down and he's like, oh yeah, we're getting 98% control up in Canada. And I'm like, you've said this 2 or 3 times, come show us. They get down here and they could not figure out why we don't get. Humidity has a great thing, because when you're evaporating a chemical, if it can't stay there long enough and your humidity causes it to drop out, the evaporators, where you're sticking it in and forcing it in there, the bees force it straight out, it seems like. If you have no brood, they don't do that. In Canada and Europe, a lot of times they have no brood. Now, if you do the European style, where you break the brood cycle, so all your capped brood is gone, you will get that's forcing the mite onto the exterior of the bee or ferretic. You might get a lot better treatment.
Formic acid's the same way. We haven't had any luck with formic here in Florida at all. And what little luck we had, I mean, all of a sudden, 2 months later, the queens shut down and they're gone or die off.
Very harsh.
So it's very harsh on them. It works much better than the oxalic because it goes into the cappings to kill the mites. But it results on the queens. I mean, it looks great at first, and then all of a sudden, a month later, the problem
It
down.
actually wipes out other bacteria and fungus in there they've seen in Europe. So,
Beneficial bacteria and fungus?
yeah, both of them actually do, because they're sterilizing agents, so they both work on it. They aren't perfect.
Has anybody signed up for bee college?
Oh, yeah.
Few people? It's, there's only about 100, last week,
Not even that, no.
there's under 100 spots left, if anybody hasn't. Highly, highly recommend it.
So that's peregrine's fallen out of favor, because I had a food manufacturing company, and peregrine was like the only type of insecticide that we could use
In a food
area.
area. Right. That's,
Is it fallen out of grace now? Is it-
yeah, because of its mites and insects building resistance.
Of resistance.
Yeah, that's the main reason. Humans can eat pyrethrin.
Yeah, I know.
mean, they were diet drugs back when, but, you know, that's not what we're looking for. We're trying to treat varroa mites. And the EPA and FDA both state that, okay, we got this bowl and all your chemicals you keep putting into this bowl, and when it's full, especially like your midicloprids and your other harder chemicals, are safe for us in one aspect, but what they're doing to other insects and vertebrates, you got to really work. Yes, Skip.
Do you know anyone in the state beekeeper that's having success using essential oils to get some level of control?
To get some level of control, yeah, they are getting some level of control with the food grade mineral oils that are out there. Not to the extent that you can control the varroa mites totally. It's a tool, and you know, it's just like the screen bottom boards. Hiroshima, how's his name? Yeah, Dr. Shim, as we knew him. He was the head of the agriculture for the USDA. He actually wrote papers on the use of screen bottom boards, because what it's doing is if you have a sick mite and it's dropping down through there and you've got healthy mites, you're leaving the good ones up. And he said that's where, when we started using screen bottom boards back in the late 80s, first part of the 90s, he said our mites started getting more virulent and stronger and healthier. And then we're using chemicals that they build up more resistance to, and
Build super mites.
building super mites, building super your antibiotics have gotten resistance now, or our American foulbrood is resistant to oxytetracycline. So
A lot of people have gone back to solid bottoms, because it's about a 50-50. It's not, there's a little bit of advantage having the screen bottom, but not 100% to say.
it adds in that tool belt that you have for mite control. If you have a screen bottom board that does about 2%, you're using a bee that is hygienic. You're using a bee that doesn't allow the mite to reproduce. Now, those are two different varieties or races or selections of bees. You've got Marla Spivak's group that's been looking for mite suppression where they go into there and they actually remove their hygienic bees. She sent us down, and actually Rob's done some work with them. The problem here in Florida is our broods builds up and goes down, builds up and goes down. And in Wisconsin, where they're testing them, the brood builds up, boop, 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 hits about July, end of July, August, boom, it shuts down. Here we end up with 6 or 7, ups and downs. They never get time to get control. And Rob said they were very slow to build up. About the time the honey flows started in full bloom, they were getting just built up.
Why do we have so many cycles?
Because we have springtime, you get started in October, November with our spring buildup, which is maple. If you notice right now, maple's starting to turn to dark red.
Because of the pollen,
lose
all over.
Yeah, so normally about December 26th, 27th, the bees start to really get stronger and stronger. Up north, it's till May.
And then it dies.
They get about 3 to 4 months, and then it shuts down. Here we get 3 months buildup, 3 months buildup, and they keep doing that. So we can have 2 to 3 swarm seasons too in Florida, especially in South Florida. Yes,
I
ma'am.
didn't understand when you said to have a screen bottom, it selects for a stronger mite. I didn't understand.
It's one of the theories that's out there. What it does is because if you have sick mites, the only mites that drop down through there are the mites that are being pinched by the bee, if you've got hygienic bees, or the sick mites. Because they're footing, if they drop off of a bee, they catch the next one, or they catch a comb, they hang very well. If they fall through that screen, they're sick. So you're naturally selecting. Yeah, or they're the old founder's mites that came out of there, out of the brood. So that's normally, and that Shimanuki was his actual last name. He was the one, him and Jeff Pettis, actually, it was Mark Feldlaufer that was looking at that in the late 80s and the early 90s on building resistance, or not building a super mite.
Is there any advantage in terms of ventilation to the screen bottom board?
Not really, because if you think about a beehive, most beehives are in an enclosed with normally 1, maybe 2 openings. We as humans think, okay, air conditioning. Now Diane brought in another thing. And we were talking about it here somewhere. There's a venting board up here that everybody in Florida loves to think everybody needs to have. If you invest in one of these, I would say also invest in a camera that shows your infrared or flare. That way it shows you your heat definition in a hive. And what you'll really find out is this disrupts that hive more than anything else. A hive of bees takes 3 days to get re-set up in there. If you have this vent hole here, what they're going to do is finally close that up if they can get up there and propolize it. We as humans think, oh, that's an air conditioning. It allows heat out of there. Bees circulate air through the hive so that they can keep it at 50% humidity and at that optimum temperature. If it's too hot up above, they're going to circulate more air out. They're going to circulate more moisture in to keep it cool, just like an air conditioner. They don't worry about the honey area up here keeping it as cool. They don't want it to get 108 or 110. That brood nest is where they worry. They want it always staying at 94.5, 95 degrees. So,
Plus, the other thing I've learned with this is they build fur coat all between the lid and the.
that's at 3/8 of an inch. Anything over 3/8 of an inch, you're going to fill with bird comb. If you want a beetle area, they love to put the beetles will harbor up in there. That's not a problem. If you want beetles, I don't know why you want beetles. But this was an idea. The other thing this isn't a telescoping lid, but it's as close to a telescoping lid as we have right now. They make an inner lid that goes into this that would look very similar to this, but it'll have a board all the way across it, and it'll have an oval hole for a porter bee escape that goes right in the center. If you have that, you've got to have a telescoping lid that fits over that. If you have a telescoping lid, you've got to have that too. Otherwise, what happens is if you put this lid over it and they seal it down, you're gonna have to take the super apart down here and take a sledgehammer and beat the frames out of it because you will not get this off of there. And it happens every year. When I was a young inspector, we didn't have as many backyard beekeepers at that time, but backyard beekeepers are northern beekeepers. They come down here and they would always have telescoping covers, and they take that inner cover out because of the bull ants and cockroaches. They hate cockroaches. Next thing they'd be calling me asking, how do I get that telescoping cover off now? Should have left the inner cover in there.
Is there any advantage to having that telescopic top versus just like a top with a feeder?
If you're up north, if you're in the north where you get snow, that gives you added insulation and it allows the moisture to vent up in there. We don't have that problem.
Hurricanes is about it.
Yeah, and hurricanes, you don't need to really super glue your hives together, gorilla table.
You can pretty much put, if you want to run it a little bit wild, put
Yeah.
a cleat on one end.
Yeah.
That's the, you know, cleat on one side, just on your windward side, front side, back side, but just the, we always consider these like a migratory lid,
Yeah.
where it's just going to sit so they can put all the hives close together on a truck. You don't have that extra loss of that space. So it's basically a,
And the other thing with
anything will
those telescoping, black widows love to hide in them. This doesn't leave any area for black widows. Scorpions will get up underneath there, and you'll know the difference between a scorpion sting and a bee sting after about the third one. You'll know which one hurts the worst. Scorpion burns, bee stings just sort of hurt.
those inner covers, they work. We don't recommend them, or I definitely don't recommend them. I think they're just a beetle magnet. Beetles love the magnet and go up above there and hang out. These will actually push the beetles up into those.
They corral them up.
They corral them up into those spaces. Solid plastic frames that have the top bars all out of plastic. They've got little recesses along that top edge. Beetles love to go in that groove. You can literally pull it out and bang it, and 100 beetles will come right out of it.
Or more.
Or more.
And they got really smart. They decided, okay, we'll just fill those with beeswax. They thought, okay, that's a good thing to do. The bees found the beeswax. The bees will somehow pull that beeswax out of there, whether it gets warm or whatever. Normally, you don't think of bees borrowing bee wax, but they will, and they'll clean that wax out of there, and next thing you know, you've got beetle holes. The beetle will go into those holes. She'll turn back around, he or she will turn back around and actually do the same thing if it's in a cell. It'll sit there and it will actually irritate the bee until she feeds them. The bee will feed that beetle, take care
Beetles
of
have
it.
learned how to take their antennas. Like a bee, when it comes in and lands on the front entrance, it'll actually go to that other bee. It takes another bee at the bottom, will take it and bring the honey up. It will actually tickle the throat of the other bee. The natural reaction is to stick its tongue out, pass the nectar on from one to the other. And it's that enzyme in the bee stomach that starts turning it into honey. Well, the beetles have learned that same thing. They can be in the little jails. They've learned to take their antennas, tickle the bee's throat, and the bees feed them while they're in jail.
So they're sitting in a beehive that's optimum temperature to it because it's going to be somewhere in the 90s. It's got food and it's nice and, taking care of everything there.
And do they get in through this screen bottom?
If they're small, they can go through that 1/8 inch. Normally they have the actual same smell as a honeybee. They mimic one of the pheromones that the bees put off. And the entrance went back over here. So they'll go right in the entrance. Now, if a beetle lands on the bottom and it's got a straight bottom board, it's got to go to the edge and go up because they can't hardly land there and fly back up upside down. They will, but that 3/4 of an inch there is a little hard for them to do it. But we tried PVC 1-inch pipes, close the front entrance totally off, make sure that your hive is sealed good, which after about 2 years of owning a beehive, it's no longer sealed good. We drill a 1-inch hole in the front. We put a 1-inch PVC, which reduces down the entrance hole to 3/4. We tried different arrangements where we had 2 holes, we had 1 in the center, we did everything. The beetle will land at the bottom of that pipe. It will not walk back out and go in. If they happen to fly in and land into the hole, the bees will normally force them back out of it. It worked real good until you open up the hive and You go through the hive, and by the time you put it back down, you've sucked every beetle in around there, so they will go back in there. But,
Beetles are attracted to the yeast and the pollen, so and they can smell that pollen up to 9 miles away. So it's just a magnet from all over. Now, it's really odd, is around the county, you'll talk to somebody, 16 around the high school here, saying, I've seen high, there's hardly any beetles in that whole area. I'm on the other side of 16, and I've got just hundreds of them. One hive will have 1,000 beetles in it, the next hive, you go across 16, there's nothing.
and we can explain some of that, because what happens is even in the feral hives, a hive may have succumbed to them, and now you just had 300,000 beetle larvae go into the ground. 99% of those emerge out, unless they get flooded and drowned or killed by something, eaten by a guinea. Otherwise, they are very good at
They
reproducing.
pupate in the ground, so they actually, after those maggots come out, they'll pupate in the ground. They'll actually walk across the ground 100 yards and go down up to 6 feet and find the,
Do a little touchdown.
and find the optimal moisture content of that soil, or they can actually pre-pupate in the soil, wait for the optimal moisture content before they emerge and come back
You
up.
can't see the beetles flying?
Oh, you can see them, but they're hard. And it's funny, because when we first started in '96, I guess it was, the first beetles we got here, I was lucky I was on the front line on it, I guess, but we decided we'd dye some of them. We use this purple dye that we can see under a black light, so it's a fluorescent, coloring. And we do it with fruit flies all the time. We send out caribou fruit flies, and we can track them, see them, and everything. The outside of the beetle is so hard, and it doesn't have any little pores on it that suck up this dye. So we're sitting there trying to track them, as they're flying back into hives and seeing how far they go. Finally, when we get the beetles out of the hive and look at them under a microscope, under the dark, the ultraviolet light, we could see right around like where their wings. Now you got to pull their back of their beetle apart, see it. And when you're sitting there trying to see them fly in, they just clean themselves off. And you couldn't see them, but it was hard to track them.
They're doing a study at UF now on beetles, on how far they'll fly.
They had the same problem. I kind of hinted to them before that you could not dye them, and they're like, those things are hard to keep dye on. The other thing we tried to do the same as with the caribou fly in the Mediterranean, where we use sterile release. The problem with beetles is when you try to irradiate them, it mutates the male so that the males and the females don't like each other anymore, or it kills the male totally. So you just raised a bunch of beetles, you nuke the heck out of them, send them out, and all the males are dead anyhow. That didn't work. So.
We had them here in North Florida about 3 months after the alarm went out. South Florida is where they really ID'd them. And it was about 3 months later. I had my hives right under the water tower at 95. That was the first one in St. John's County to find beetles.
We
So
said
that's all the semis going up and down the highway, flying off the semis.
and these are actually, they came from South Africa or from Africa. And in Africa, they said they're a very big problem for strawberries. They'll get in they're fruit eater. They're they eat more than just fruit normally. They're a sap beetle. So they're in the Nididula family. So we thought, well, shoot, there'll be a problem for our strawberries.
Yeah, that's right.
Okay. Well, we looked around, we never found them on strawberries in Florida. We were doing a program, seeing what we could use to feed them and everything. Lawrence Cutts, who was my boss at that time, decided, hey, they say in South Africa they love strawberries, so we went and bought, it was about this time of the year, went and bought a thing of strawberries. We figured Plant City strawberries. We put the beetles in there. We came back about 3 hours later, the beetles were dead. We're like, whoa, that didn't work. So Lawrence and I had eaten all the strawberries that were left over anyhow. We got to looking at the label, and we could not tell where those strawberries, it looked like they were produced in California. But
At
then
this time of
underneath-
year, of course, they're not, it's March when they produce
Well,
up there.
yeah, here, September, October, we're starting, we should start seeing them pretty soon. But we were like, this is strange, so we took it back up to our department, and Jose read it, and he's like, well, it says, the label says product of product of California. Underneath in Spanish, it said produced in Mexico. And we were like, well, how can it be that? And he said, well, the registered label for that strawberry is that name. And we're like, well, it's got to then say product of Mexico. Then he said, somehow you got by. We called to find out, well, what chemical can they use that we weren't using here in Florida? It was actually what's being used now that everybody's complaining about, the midicloprids. The midicloprids kill the heck out of that beetle.
But it affects the taste of the strawberry.
Well, no, it doesn't affect the taste of strawberry, but we weren't using it in Florida. Now they've been using midicloprids for about 15 years in Florida. But we were like, here, we thought we had a cure-all for beetles, but it wasn't strawberries. Yep. Any other questions?
Gotta be some.
So let's say you leave the honey off the bees, can you then use that frame and foundation for the next year? Or given that it's been in the hive with the apple bar?
That's why most of our commercial guys run a story and a half, so they don't confuse this super with their honey supers that they're using. They leave that, they treat with it there all year round. We know that that wax doesn't migrate up into the other, they're not taking that wax and moving it up. So as long as you're not, worried about that, the capping wax is where most of that's found at. If you take the cappings off and you actually look at those, 90% of your chemicals are in those. They're the virgin wax, and that's where they come in contact with them. So that'll
So
answer
once
some.
that foundation and that frame has been treated with apple bar, you cannot ever use it for honey?
I would say I would, but it's not that I'm worried about apivar
We should
or,
mark those frames.
yeah. And like we were talking
You
earlier,
don't use your root,
Yeah.
root frame for honey production.
I have a lot of brood up in the cities.
yeah, so I'd just leave my excluder either above that and leave that there continuously. The other thing that does is running that like that after 3 to 4 years of just natural chemicals they're picking up as she's flying around through the pollen, through the nectar, everything, they end up in there anyhow. So it's amazing.
One of our recommendations is to mark your frames. I take all mine and I'll put the date on the top of the frame with a marker. Instead of, just mark my numbers, my date, real quickly. Mark a date on it, so then I know that every 5 years I take that piece of wax, cut it out and throw it away. Or throw the whole frame out. Because I know that thing's got chemicals from all over the place. Build up, and the cell stuff is smaller.
How often do you toss those?
About every 5 years.
We recommend every 3 years, do a rotation of every 3 years. Reason being, in your brood frame, you're seeing that especially here in Florida, your chemical levels are getting high. Most of your commercial guys that y'all people buy in commercial nooks, Jester does not do this as much as your other commercial beekeepers. They will take their 3-year-old comb, they're on a 3-year rotation. They're selling those 3 frames in that brood nook, they'll be 3 years old, won't they? Those 2 outside frames are the older ones. So I would mark those as older frames you're wanting to get rid of sooner or later, because that beats them having to melt them down, get rid of them. They just sell them. And a 3-year-old frame, back when I was a kid, we were proud to have 60, 70-year-old frames. Not anymore. We didn't know what was in them.
Who they sell them to?
Backyard beekeepers.
Who don't know better?
Well, it's not going to hurt your bees. They're still going to be good. Like Bo's saying 5 years. There's beekeepers out there still that manage. Well, we got one. How old is he now?
98.
98, and he's still managing the same frames. I bought hives from him when I was 12. And
And you know that the American fall brood spores,
yeah,
and that's where the American fall brood comes in, is it's in some of their
Years
own
and years
equipment
of that wax.
that is suppressed, and they've been throwing terramycin and masking the chemical, the problem, the disease for years.
So when you use one of those uncappers, like I help them, that cuts most of that chemical out?
Well, that cuts off the capping wax.
Yeah,
The
hoping
capping
is the newest one.
And now when they render that wax, when it's run through a process, it actually gets rid of about 98% more of that that's in there. And it's one of two methods. They do it over water and they're doing it with heat. I would not want to be the guy that's heating that wax.
Yeah, standing over it.
Because the vapors of amatraz come off, Coumaphos goes down into the water. So it's a heavy chemical where you're vaporizing your pyrethrins and your...
We did big studies on it a few years ago. Penn State was doing a big, Marion Fraser was doing that. They found like 120 chemicals in wax.
Wow. Florida.
So bees
No,
are
it's all
nothing more than dust
mite.
mites. Bees are out there, they're dust mites. You gotta remember, they're dust mops flying through the air.
Right. Yeah,
They're positively charged. And as they get near that flower or anything, all those chemicals jump right onto that bee.
And because you've got chemicals that are attracted to lipids or fats. You've got ones that are water soluble, which go into your nectar. And the other ones just stick in the pollen and then slowly migrate over. What was interesting when Mary Ann and her husband did this study, they actually found 157 chemicals that were found in beehives, some in wax, some in honey, some in the bees. They found how many different organisms that, bacteria, fungus, all sorts of stuff.
Some are good, some are bad.
Bad. It's really, we're just starting to learn about some of these things. There's some natural oils that bees pick up from the flowers that control mites. Actually, thymol that we're using was actually found in Italy because they were watching the bees as they work lemons. There's some lemons and there's some other natural exuding thymol plants over there that they noticed that their mite levels would drop. And so that's when they started looking at the active ingredient, which is thyme, or the thymol, the oil, and it worked real good. It's just you got to do it when it's brewless almost.
Yeah, we live amongst many little animals that we have food.
Yeah.
If probably most people knew it.
Oh, it's like the other day I got a sample of bees, came back from Brazil, and we dropped them in, and all of a sudden these little bitty, almost microscopic insects were all over them. And I'm like, what the heck are these? And we got to looking in Brazil, it's fairly common that these little, they look like they're almost an ant relative, but they're almost like a thrift also. They're on the flower, and in order to be transferred from this flower to the next colony of this trigomas or whatever they're called, they grab hold of the bees, and maybe 500 or 600 of them. In this case, there was one bee with probably looked like 1,500 of them in the bottom. That it was a bigger stingless bee. It carried them over, and that's typical. Here in the U.S., our one guy doing our mite washes and bee washes for us, he's found 2 or 3 of them, but nothing like what we were seeing in the native bees. And then it dawned on us, in Brazil, they're not out there spraying all the plants and keeping all these at bay. And so our bees that are going, they're not finding them. And ours are honeybees, and they're supposed to be more apt to jump on the honeybees than the stingless bees.
There's that concept also of the mites actually being on a flower and being transferred from flower by one bee coming, dropping it off, next bee comes in and it jumps on.
I can tell you this for a fact. So I've been working with grow mites since '87. Last week, I finally proved something that I never could prove. I was sitting in the bee yard, we worked the bees, 2 hives of bees. We got our mite count and everything. Actually, it was the week before. And I said, we got mites in this one hive pretty bad. So we could see some deformed wing. I went back to my house, had actually washed my hands and everything. It's been about an hour and a half, and I'm sitting there eating a piece of dark chocolate. And I look down and I think, what is moving on my hand? A varroa mite was crawling on my hand. And so I can now say for a fact that a beekeeper can actually transmit varroa mites. Now, this one didn't get very far, because at first I thought it was a tick. And so I went to grab it, look at it under a microscope, and when I did, I was like, that's varroa mite. So I squished it. But it's a love-hate relationship with me and varroa mites. It's like small hive beetles. I knew we could transmit them. I've had them in my ear, I've had them up the nose. So
How can he survive the hand washing and everything? And we put it in
it was probably on my arm. It was either up on my arm somewhere. But I would have never
Regardless,
thought.
transfer.
Yeah, I transferred it into the vial.
It was actually the chocolate.
Yes. Yeah, I thought at first that maybe it was chocolate. It wasn't good. So.
When I posted my video online of my queen inspection that I just had done recently, I was scolded by a lot of people for allowing the inspector to use his tools on my hive. Do you think in the future that's something you guys might consider, is using?
We sterilize our, if Rob is going from not necessarily one hive to the next, but from beekeeper to beekeeper, they're required to sterilize their hive, either in fire, which varroa mite can't survive the fire, or they use alcohol. Alcohol is not a guaranteed way of killing the bacteria, your spore forming. So we prefer, they put their hive tool in their smoker, and their next yard, they'll have it in the smoker and take it in the sand. So most of the time, you're not going to transmit American foul brood on your gloves, because the bee has to suck the part of your glove, take that bacteria to a young larva. And normally they're not going to do that on your gloves. American foul brood has to be fed to a young larva at roughly less than 51 hours of age. Otherwise, it doesn't harm adult bees, it doesn't harm semi-adult bees.
Would it be a better practice to use the own keeper's tools on?
Sure, if that's how you know, if you prefer. Now, your spreading of American foul brood is going to come when your hive dies of American foul brood. That's where knowing what American foul brood looks like, transferring varroa mites, you're going to transfer them by bee to bee or swapping combs around. But to have that one varroa mite, I can now prove that varroa mites can't be carried on me.
And varroa cannot transfer AFB or EFB?
No, we've never been able to find AFB. Now, with small hive bees,